everyone, and welcome to the members only live stream that we are going to be doing today about residential historical architecture. I am Marie Walker, and I'm the Director of Education here at the Northeast Georgia History Center. I have a degree in history, and I also have a certificate in historic preservation, where basically I got to talk about old houses and old historic sites for the entirety of my certificate process. And I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite parts of that my study with you today, which is how to identify historical houses and styles and the time periods in which those were popular in. Because if you've ever seen an old house, you're like, that's so pretty, I wonder when it's from. Well, I'm going to tell you what style it is and how the style can help indicate what time period it was built in. This is a very brief overview. This is by no means a complete look at all historical residential architecture, but it's perhaps more specific to our region, which is for Northeast Georgia, since we are the Northeast Georgia History Center, and also more specific to the eastern region of the United States along the Atlantic coast. So we're going to be focusing in on that today, and then we are only going to be covering some of the styles from early colonial to 1900. We will not be going into the 20th century today because I was worried that I'm not going to make it through all of these today because I love talking about this so much. So without further ado, we are going to begin with colonial architecture, or early colonial architecture. So this is one example of early colonial architecture. It is the House of Seven Gables. As you can see, a gable is the pointed part of the roof there, and if you count all of them, there will be 7. This is a house that inspired many a story. We won't get into those today. That's a whole nother historic literature talk. But it was built in 1668 in Salem, Massachusetts, and this reflects traditional buildings in wood. As you can see, it is made of wood. And when I'm saying traditional, like what tradition it reflects, this is reflecting traditional English medieval houses. So within early colonial architecture, you will have English colonial, you'll have Spanish colonial, you'll have Dutch colonial. Those are 3 of the big main ones that you'll see. Of course, there's many other different types of colonial architecture. Mainly today, we're only going to be taking a look at the English colonial with some influences of the others, but predominantly English. As you can see, this house was asymmetrical. Early colonial architecture did not care that much about form or style. It cared more about shelter versus structure. These were people who were coming over and needed to get out of the elements of the harsher New England climate, and therefore it was more about function over form for them at this point. As you can see, they kind of just built on the house where they wanted it to be or needed it to be. You can see it has a very steep roof line that goes back to the tradition of the post-medieval period. It has a decorative overhang, which you can see, which is also reflective of medieval and post-medieval time frame that it's in. It has a massive central chimneys. You can see there are 2 central chimneys here and there. This is a very interesting thing which some historian architecture people like to debate. In New England, you will see massive chimneys in the center of houses. When you go down south, you will see the chimneys are on either side of the house. They are not in the center of the house. Why was this done? Well, some people would like to say that it is because New England is colder and therefore you want the heat to be in the center of your house because it warms the house all the way through, versus in the south it is so hot already you don't need you don't want the large fireplace to be in the center of your home. You're going to put it on the side of your home so the heat will radiate off into the outdoors and not into your house. Some people also say it's just regional variance in historic architecture and architectural style. That's just how people who settled New England did things versus people in the South did things purely based on style and preference. We will not know. But it is a much more, you don't see large central chimneys in the South, you only see those in the northern United States. You also have casement windows here that you can see for the fenestration or the window treatments, and it is 2 stories in height. As you can see, it has 2 stories. And when I'm referring to the decorative overhang, you can see it in the far corner over there is the decorative overhang. Some people believe that this overhang came about in medieval Europe because you were only taxed on the first floor, how many square feet your first floor was, and therefore to get extra space and not be taxed, you would have the overhang that would go over on the second floor. And then that would be, you would create more room that you didn't have to pay money for. And I guess people just like enjoyed the look because I don't think that was necessarily something that was going on in the United States in our tax laws, but it's the style that they were used to and were comfortable building in, and therefore some of it had transferred over here. So now we'll go on to the next slide. That is also about early colonial. So early colonial has a lot of different variances, as you can see here. Now we are going a little farther south. We're going to Virginia, so we have the chimneys on either side. We are also looking at Bacon's Castle, and this is basically a transported English estate into the American Virginian countryside. It is one of the older surviving brick structures in America. It is probably one of the nicest homes from the 1600s that is still in existence in America. Because this, as I said, it's like a country estate that was put in the Virginian countryside. This was something that you don't really see a lot of anywhere, and let alone for it to have survived so many hundreds of years. But it's really just 17th century English architecture put into America. But it has one variance that you can tell where it has more continental influence, and that is with the Flemish gables. And the Flemish gables are right here. You can see it kind of has like this curve on the side of the house, on the side of the gable here. And that would be the Flemish gable, which is different than an English gable that you might have and shows more colonial influence and blending of cultures. The original casement for the windows would be diamond pane casements. This is an interesting tidbit of window history. So we think of, basically you can tell the older the house, the more small panes they have, because the tinier the glass is, we were not able to create glass segments in larger areas until later. So if you're looking back at like medieval windows or post-medieval Renaissance windows, are usually done in diamond panes, and then it's diamonds, and then they are connected together into a window. And then you get squares, and you'll get like 9/9, and then you'll get 6/6. And then finally you'll get like 1/1, and then we just kind of put wood over the 1/1 panes to make it look like it's a 6-pane window when it really isn't. I guess we're just trying to emulate the historic look there, but we're not actually emulating the historic practice. So that's another way you can kind of figure out how old a house might be, or if it has the original windows. A lot of times the original windows do not survive, sadly. I do not believe they survive here. They are no longer the diamond paned, but they would have been. Here we can also see, oh, that's okay.
I'll go back. Let's see.
All right, we're going back just for a second, because we are also going to talk about there is the very steep roof line here. We have a gable in the center, and then under that we have a very nice door frame with a double door. It is very symmetrical versus the houses having gables that we just saw. So you have, it's a 5/5 plan, and with a center hall. You can see the center hall, it would open up, and then you would have either side, you would have side rooms on either side of the central hall, which would be the interior plan. You also have some decorative pediments over the windows, which you can tell makes it a fancier house. On the side here, you can also tell it's a center hall with 2/2. So there's windows here on the side. So even the side is also symmetrical. Also, you have segmented chimneys, which is really interesting and cool. So you have a different flute for each of the chimneys that you have there. And that shows that you were quite a fancy person because you were able to afford the segmented chimneys. Also goes back to the ideas of medieval architecture and bringing that into the early colonial or post-medieval world that this house is existing in. All right, now we can go to the next one.
Here we go.
So here we have a very plain earth, very traditional early colonial. Steep roof line, center chimney. This is a 3/3, which means you have a center hall, but then you have only one window per room. So this is the Elu Coleman House, and it was built in 1772, Nantucket Island, Massachusetts. It also has the lean-to or salt box configuration, which is very popular in New England. So if you look at the side of the house here, it starts at the top, and then it kind of, so it's 2 stories, but it doesn't stop at the 2 stories here. It goes all the way down to here, or to there. The tree is blocking it a little bit, but you can see the roof line extends farther in the back than it does in the front. And that means it's a salt box or a lean-to kind of configuration for the house. This is what you're going to see for a lot of more traditional colonial or early colonial houses, is something that looks a lot like this, especially in New England. As I said, you notice New England when you see salt box configuration is very much a New England thing, as well as the central chimney. Steep roof line is colonial everywhere. And let's see if there's anything. So early colonial in America is going to be from about the late 1600s to American Revolution. That's about the time where you see this style of house being built, and this style of house is popular. So if you see a house that is like this, it's most likely going to be somewhere between late 1600s to American Revolution, which is around 1780s, I would say. And then this style of house goes out of favor. Why does things go out of fashion? Humans are fickle and like to change things up and to have different styles. Now that doesn't mean that if it was built in this time, it has to be early colonial, because there are other styles that exist at the same time as this one, which we are going to be talking about in the next slide. So the Georgian. This is a very fancy, high Renaissance style. This is basically the English Renaissance or it's harkening back to the ideas of the Renaissance, and that is the Georgian. It is popular in America from the early 1700s to the American Revolution, and then it is associated, as you can tell by the name, with the King Georges of England. And well, America kind of had a revolution to get rid of those kings, and therefore anything associated with the king or British aristocracy was also frowned upon. So that house goes out of style about the time of the American Revolution, and you don't see any Georgian houses past the American Revolution. This house is called Mount Pleasant, and it was built in 1761. It is the house of Benedict Arnold and Peggy Shippen. They lived here, so the most famous American trader. And this is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That was the new capital of America at this time, so you have a lot of wealth going on here. And the Georgian house is going to be a style that is very upper crust, upper class. It requires training and style books to get the correct Georgian style, and therefore it is pricey. Also, you can tell with the materials used, this was a fancy, expensive house. The Georgian has rigid symmetry. So if I took like a knife and go through the middle of this house here, it is going to look the same on either side. It will be a mirror image of each other. This has actual entrances, so we have an extra entrance in the front, the back, and both sides, as you can see on the side there. We also have geometrical proportions, and that is to be the idea that there is not just one random large piece or design element. All the design elements are harmonious and are going to reflect the scale of each other. Here you can see these windows are 9/9 window panes. As we go forward, you'll see they get less. One of the hallmarks of the Georgian style is the hipped roof. So a hip roof is basically a parallelogram. It is shorter on the top and it goes wider to the bottom. This one has dormer windows on either side of those hipped roof, which is very fancy and very nice. It has sash windows, and it also has this fun Palladian window right here. And the Palladian window is very much a Renaissance element that was brought back into the Georgian design. You will see them in Georgian houses, and but they are not necessarily a hallmark element of a Georgian. So you can have a Georgian house without a Palladian window. That is popular. I mean, and perfectly fine. It's still a Georgian house. I would say the hallmarks of the Georgian is the rigid symmetry, the axial entrances, the geometrical proportion, and the hipped roof. The hipped roof is probably the biggest giveaway that it's a Georgian house. And then this one just has a lot of really interesting design elements as well. So you have the pedimented front here. So you have two pediments really. You have the top one, and then you have the one over the door. This is a really interesting doorway. You have two columns on either side, and then you have the nice arch over the doorway there. It has a light over the doorway as well. You also have some dental work. That's what these little bumps along the ridge are called, is called dental work, which I just think is really funny. But it's a fun decorative piece that they have there. They also have some pediments over the windows. You can tell those are fancy. Then you also have some brickwork along that as well. So now we're going to go on to the next house, which is also a Georgian house, but it's a little bit different. As you can see, it still has the hip roof and some of the other elements, but this one is called Drayton Hall. It was built in 1738 to 1742, and it is located near Charleston, South Carolina. So we're going a little farther south, which the south has some different variations to the Georgian style. But it has the double Palladian portico, which is really interesting, and probably one of the only houses in America that does this. This style of architecture was also very popular in England and other places in Europe. And it's not exclusive to America by any means, but America definitely did use it. As you can see, we have those two here. This also has the double staircase that goes to the house. It is 3 stories with because the basement is raised because it's South Carolina. You have some marshland if you're near if you're near Charleston, South Carolina, and you probably don't want to build underground. Also, you want it to be nice and cool, so having a raised basement would be nice. But you're still entering on the second floor, or what would be considered the main floor is still where your entrance is going to be. This one is built of brick, and we have the 2 chimneys on either side, which are very large. You can see from this angle of the picture, the hipped roof, they attempt to get as flat as possible, but that's not always possible with building techniques and builders. But you can see they're trying to hide that roof line as much as they can, but they have not quite hidden it under the hipped roof. Also, this one has this. This is a great example of the hierarchy of orders. So we have Doric columns on the bottom here, and then we have Ionic columns on top. So if you're going to your Greek order of columns, the Doric columns, I might have to do a whole lecture just on the orders, because we'll get too involved with this, but it's interesting. You will not see Doric columns above Ionic columns. Ionic columns are more decorative and therefore are rank higher in the orders of columns. So that's a fun element there. We also have dental work along the top as a decorative piece. All right, so let's go to the federal style. So the federal style, sometimes called the Adamesque if you are not in America, but this style is so strongly identified with the Federalist era, which is the beginning of America, that it is literally called Federalist architecture or federal style. And this is kind of a rejection of the Baroque and Rococo and all that fancy stuff that the aristocracy liked, and is a much more simplified version of architecture. So here we have Point of Honor. It was built in 1815 and it's in Lynchburg, Virginia. It is an extremely refined example of the federal style. So this is probably this is like the fanciest the federal style gets. And it's really interesting because it has these octagonal sections that are then connected with a straight section here. It has a double porch, which is really awesome, with Doric columns supporting that. One of the hallmarks that I always can identify, I'm like, this is a federal house, is the fan lights over the doors. So these nice, the glass that kind of looks like it's the arched fan that it goes over the door are called arched fan lights, and that is very much a hallmark of the federal style. And pretty much it then is, the chimneys are on the side. It's a fairly normal roof line that is gabled on either side. This one has the matched polygonal bays on either side of the recessed entranceway. And we have 9/9 windows. So again, it's still earlier. It's early 1800s. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all of the federals. We're going to go in the next one. You'll see a more plain federal style. So basically, it looks like the same house but without the octagonal bays on it. So this is what the federal style is, very much dumbed down. If you don't have like the octagonal bays, like the first one, this is what most federal style look like, but it still has a porch with the Doric columns. It still has a fan light over the door. It has 9/9 windows. It has some dental work on the top, which is a fun thing, and then chimneys on either side. This is the Church Waddell Brumby House, which is a mouthful to say, but it's named after all of the people who have lived in that house. It was built in 1820s in Athens, Georgia, and so in other parts of the world, this style is called Adamesque, after the man who kind of invented this style, but he was Scottish. Another hallmark of federal architecture is having these light decorative features that are in contrast with Baroque and Rococo. So like I said, this is a rejection of the Baroque and Rococo, which are these large, gaudy, heavy decorative elements. So you have more light iron. If you have ironwork, it's light. As you can see, these columns, they're not heavy, they're not big, they're very slender. The dental work up top is very small and light. The porch is also, again, very slender rails. The fan light is very slender. The pilasters that's going on, those are the columns that are not actual columns. They just look like columns that are kind of pressed to the front of the house. Very light, very slender. Very much in the vertical plane. It's not making you go horizontal, you want to go vertical. So it's drawing your eye up, versus Baroque and Rococo, where your eyes just kind of go everywhere because there's so much going on because they were horrified of undecorated surfaces. This is much more minimalist in the architecture world. All right, so we're going to go on to the Neoclassical. So the Neoclassical was not widely used in residential architecture, but I have to talk about it because one of the most famous houses in America, the White House in Washington, D.C., is of neoclassical design. It was built originally in 1792 in Washington, D.C. It was built out of stone. Sadly, in the War of 1812, but it didn't happen until 1814, but in the War of 1812, because they named after the war after it, the year it started, but not it went past 1812. But in 1814, the British seized Washington, D.C. and burnt the White House. So here we have a picture of it burnt, or an engraving of it burnt, because pictures don't come around until the 1830s. But it's built out of stone. The same person who was the original architect was able to rebuild it and restore it to how it originally looked. So I would not say it looks exactly like it was built today, because they had the east and the west bays added later. As you can tell, there's no large portico here. There's not a rounded thing in the back. Those get added in the 1830s when you're doing more of the Greek revival, which we'll get to in just a second. But this one, it's built out of stone. The neoclassical design is very much, it's much heavier than the federal style buildings. It has more influence from Roman antiquity and also Palladian proportions, so it's much bigger, it's much heavier. Your eye does not go up, it goes to the side. You have really big pediments. You also have pediments over every single window on the bottom here. You also have these very large Ionic columns. You have 4 chimneys that you can see up top, and then there's also like another 5th and 6th that are on the bottom there. Again, they're trying to make it look flat on the top, which is really interesting. Sometimes you'll see like those railings that it has up here. These got burnt, but over here you can see the railings that are still there, because they're trying to hide that the roof isn't flat, because they can't make a flat roof at this time. Also, if it snowed, then you would be sunk. The roof could very easily collapse if it was bearing weight improperly. But they wanted a flat roof, so they tried to make it look like one. Here on the far side, ooh, I can't reach it, but there, oh, no, I can't reach it. On the far side, there you can see some excellent example of pilaster columns. So they look like columns, but they're not actually separated from the building. They are still part of the building, but they're just kind of raised from the building. So, like I said, it looks more neoclassical here, and then it's still considered neoclassical. It's used in a lot of public buildings, and the White House is kind of a public/private building. It has both functions. So perhaps if we do one on public architecture, we will talk more about neoclassical. But now we're going to go to the Greek, Jeffersonian. How could I forget Jeffersonian? Jeffersonian is before the Greek revival. So this is Monticello, named in the style of its designer Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson loved architecture so much and designed so many buildings that a style of architecture is now named after him, which is Jeffersonian. So this is Monticello. It was built from 1768 to 1809 because Jefferson kept adding things to it. It is in Albemarle County, Virginia. And Jefferson was really interested in the ancient Roman style of architecture as well as contemporary French architecture of the time. And in my mind, I think Roman equals rounded. So you can see there's a lot of round elements around like this top cupola of sorts here. We also then have the Roman or the Greek pediment, which was used. So we have pediment over the door and then over the door again. Here we have some nice Doric columns. The house is still like a little bit rounded, as you can see as it goes back. Also has the railing on the top, well, on the top and then on the top again. It has the rounded windows on that raised section as well. The windows are very large and go almost all the way to the ground. We have a rounded arch on the very far side of the building over there. You can see there is a rounded Roman arch. the Greeks could not make arches. That was the Romans could only figured out how to make a rounded arch. So if you're looking at anything ancient and you see an arch on it, that means it's Roman, because they were able to figure out how to do that architecturally speaking, whereas the Greek had not figured that out yet, when we will talk about that a little bit more in a bit. Jeffersonian architecture kind of parallels federal architecture, as it is is mainly post American Revolution, and then goes to around 1830. This is kind of like a subsection of architecture. A lot of people are inspired by Jefferson and kind of create buildings in his same style, but a lot of it is just Jefferson building things. So our next one is the Greek Revival. So this is the old governor's mansion. It was built in 1839 in Milledgeville, Georgia. Greek Revival style was insanely popular in the United States because some people think it took such great hold in the United States because America thought of itself as the spiritual ancestor inheritance of Greece and Roman democracy, and therefore they wanted to emulate Greece in their architecture and democracy. And but really, we also think of Greek Revival as it's a lot of public buildings, it's a lot of private buildings. When you think of a southern plantation, you probably think of the Greek Revival style, and that's also because this is when America's experiencing a lot of wealth due to agricultural and slave labor that is bringing in a lot of wealth, especially to the American South. And this is when cotton is king. You have the cotton gin that is made it far easier to produce cotton, and then you have slave labor that is picking that cotton to then go and sell to the world. So you also have, and America is fairly at peace during this time, from the 1820s to 1860s. There's like a few wars, but there's no major conflict like the Civil War, which will be brewing. So it's a time of relative peace and prosperity in America, and it's also when America is creating its national identity, and therefore it wants to be Greece. So it creates things like this, which pretty much look like a Greek temple. And it's really interesting because they're recreating these Greek temples as they look in the 1830s. This is a very rare case where it's not stark white, because usually these buildings are stark white because that is how the Roman ruins look even to this day, and they had no idea that they were actually polychromed all over and were very, very colorful. So it adds to that perception of what they thought Greece was, but it was missing all the color. But as I was saying, the Greek influence is really popular in the US. Some people think it was just because, well, this was a very popular style. US was experiencing a lot of economic growth. Some architecture historians think it's because America thought of itself as the new Greece. As you can see, they have the temple front here, which, and this is, it's wide, it's tall, it is bold, it is loud, and it's very much drawing attention to itself. But you have the pediment here. You then have the pedimented gables, as you can see, that are up here. A very heavy cornice, and the cornice is the thing that runs along the building right there. That's the cornice, so it's very, very heavy. You have the unadorned frieze, which is, the frieze is the middle of the pediment there, and it is unadorned. In Greece, it could have been adorned. Sometimes they had statues and different things going on there. But again, this is America recreating the ruins of Greece, and a lot of times those decorative features had broken off and were no longer there. The horizontal transom, which is also part of the pediment, so there, that's the transom. And then no arches, because this is Greek. So there is not like a really, there's no rounded elements really. There is like even the pediments here, I mean slightly rounded, but they're really not. The door, over the door, we have the fan lights go away. They are going to be trays of light over the door. They are no longer going to be rounded. We have the Ionic columns, which are the second highest order, which are here on the, there we go. They're on the governor's mansion. This is the old governor's mansion in Milledgeville, Georgia. It's beautiful. Would highly recommend going to go see it. Here we have another example of Greek revival. That is the stark white, and this is very much the recreation of a Greek temple. You have all of these. Are these? Oh no, these are more fluted Tuscan. These are fluted Tuscan columns. They're Tuscan because they don't have a base. Doric has a base. And here, see, here's a very good example of the tray lights over the door. No arches. And all these columns just go almost all the way around the house. They are not on the back of the house because no one, you don't have people pull up in their carriage to the back of your house, so you're not going to waste money putting columns on that side. But you're presenting what looks like a Greek temple. This is Barrington Hall, which is built in 1839 in Roswell, Georgia. Apparently 1839 was a very large building year. I can name multiple Greek Revival style houses that were built in Georgia in 1839. I guess it was an economic boom time where everyone had a lot of money to build Greek Revival style houses. The Greek Revival style is also a lot about symmetry, so if I take my knife and cut it through the middle there, it's going to look like a mirror image on both sides. The use of columns, I don't think there really is a Greek Revival style house without columns, unless you're looking at row houses, and then we're talking more about floor plans. But if you have a standalone house, you more than likely have columns for a Greek Revival style house, but not always. You can have like a row house that is Greek Revival style without columns. Also, it has a shallow roof. Like I said, they wanted it to be like as flat as possible. It was not steep by any means. They were trying to get it as flat as possible because that's kind of what it looked like to the Greeks. Or if you did have kind of like this one's trying to be a Greek temple with the columns all the way around it, and therefore this is the side of the temple, but that's where you would enter. But it's on either side of it would be the pediments that you would be looking at, and therefore this one is not completely flat, but it's still not steep by any means. And of course, these houses are usually white. Sometimes you see them in different colors, like we just saw the one in beige, which is kind of an offshoot of white. I think I've seen, well, usually they're not Greek Revival style if they're not white. Usually they're another style that's very close to the same time period, but are not quite the Greek Revival. You can see Greek Revival usually has a center hall with then a room on either side of it. So we aren't getting much into floor plan. We're doing more of the outside of the houses. All right. So this is the Italianate. So this is what I'm thinking about when I'm saying it's it could be more colorful or more decorative, but it's about the same time period because the Italianate style was also popular around the same time as the Greek Revival style. This house is the Hay House, which was built in 1855 in Macon, Georgia. The Italianate style has arches. As you can see, it has the arch windows, which I think are just so beautiful. It has an arched doorway, lots of rounded elements. It has circles up here on the top. It also has, well, we'll get to that in just a moment. So lots of arches, lots of rounded, beautiful elements. It also has the overhang here, which is very much, this is also called the Italian villa style, and because it looks like the Italian Renaissance just brought on over to America. So wide eaves, that are then bracketed. So these large brackets that go under the eave. That's like the hallmark of Italianate style, is that wide overhang with those brackets. Italianate style is very popular from around 1830s, 1840s. This actually goes past the Greek Revival and it stays around to like the 1860s, 1870s. Greek Revival kind of ends with the Civil War. But of course, sometimes you still see like 1860s, 1870s Greek Revival, nowhere near as popular as before the war, because economics was a driving factor in building. And after the Civil War, the South was devastated and didn't recover for a very, very long time. So also, this also has a low-pitched roof, the Italian villa style, very low-pitched, not steep at all. And it has a cupola. So if you listen to one of our podcasts where I talk about some of my favorite historic sites, I talk about this one and how amazing this cupola is. It's fantastic. I love it. I got to go walk around this. So there's the windows there, and that's where the staircase is. And then on top of that, where that little like little railing is where you can go and walk around, and it's quite amazing. You can go listen to our podcast, hear me talk more about it. We have symmetry as well. If I take my knife and cut down the middle, it'll look like a mirror image. You have the segmented flutes on the top of those chimneys, which is very nice. And the double porch and portico, that also has the rounded elements to it as well, which make up some of the very nice things of the Italianate style. All right, so here we have Second Empire. So this is Terrace Hill in Des Moines, Iowa. It is now their governor's mansion. It's one of the most lavish houses of the Second Empire style. And the more lavish it is, the more hallmark characteristics it has of being Second Empire, because they are able to put in all the money and get all of the characteristics. So we have been doing symmetry for about half a century now, almost a whole century. And now we are going for picturesqueness and asymmetry. If I cut down the middle of this, it does not look like the same on either side. This is very much borrowed from France, as this was named for the reign of Napoleon III, which is the Second Empire of France. After France goes through all of its revolutions and uprisings, Napoleon III gets in charge, and it is now called the Second Empire. The hallmark of Second Empire is the mansard roof. So this roof is a double-pitched roof with a steep lower slope, almost always pierced by dormers, because it adds a whole level to the house that you can then use instead of attic space. You need light in the roof, so you almost always have dormer windows that are piercing the mansard roof. The mansard roof was created in the French Renaissance, and then it really gained popularity, well, here. This style is really popular. It's hard to say if it started in the 1860s, because America was at war and therefore was not really concerned about building pretty buildings at the moment. So when I think Second Empire, it's very much 1870s, 1880s, 1890s in America. Different if you're, it started in France, it started earlier in France, then had to make its way over to America and be accepted in popularity and have America be economically well off enough to build nice, pretty houses like this. But it has a lot of classical elements here, classical pediments over the doors. It's very decorative. We also have wide overhang with brackets, which is like the Italianate style. But you know it's Second Empire when you see the mansard roof, because no other style has that mansard roof as definite. But you also have like this tower here, which is really cool. That you see in the Second Empire, this asymmetry, the playing with the height. This is very much about height, not about width at all. So the Queen Anne looks a little bit like the Second Empire, but it has a little bit of differences. This is the Queen Anne style house. This is actually my sorority house, the Delta Phi Epsilon house, which was built in 1890. It's located in Athens, Georgia. Queen Anne likes to play with a mixture of different textures. So we have some stone here. We have some brick here, as you can see. It's all painted white, so it's hard to tell. But up top there, we have some different lattice work. Down here, it's also brick. Up here, it's wood. Here, we have some more fun dental work and different type of wood patterns. So lots of different textures going on in the Queen Anne style. Also asymmetrical. One side does not look like the other. It also likes to play with depth. So as you can see, you have the rounded part coming out here. You have that, the dormers coming out. It's not one straight front. It's very much playing with depth. It has two gables and one pediment. It has this lovely steep turret, which is very fun. It usually has an asymmetrical porch, which means the porch starts, it only goes about half of the building. And it has a lot of different fun elements, different shapes that it likes to play with. This was named after Queen Anne, who basically created Great Britain as we know it, who reigned in the early 1700s. And this idea is kind of hearkening back to that old post-medieval Europe style that we were looking at in the very early colonial, is kind of coming back and then meshing with the Second Empire, and then we get this. Queen Anne's very popular from about 1870s to 1890s, going into the Edwardian era just a little bit, but its height of popularity is the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So now we have the Bose Arts style. So the Bose Arts is the last kind of hurrah of the 1800s styles that we have here. This is Marble House, and it was built in the 1888 to 1892, and it is in Newport, Rhode Island. So the Bose Art style, translated from French, is the fine arts. And this refers to the aesthetic principles that were enunciated and prepared by the École des Beaux-Arts in France. So there's one school of architecture in France that all of this comes from. They have an abhorrence of undecorated surface areas again, and usually these are also very much defined by their monumental staircases. This is built by one of the Vanderbilts, so they have a lot of money. This is a style for people who have a lot of money, or for public buildings. You do not see this in a normal residential neighborhood. You see this in the millionaire's residential neighborhood. It looks a lot to me like neoclassical, but it's mixed with some other different things. It is grander than the neoclassical, especially on the inside, which we'll see in just a second. So we have these columns, which I think are Corinthian, or they might have just made them up, being influenced by the Corinthian dental work. We have arches, we have pilasters, we have staircases outside with wrought iron and street lights on your own porch, lots of windows, showing off your wealth in any way possible. Now we're going to go to the inside. Monumental staircases define Bose Arts. And if that's not a monumental staircase that is displaying your wealth, I don't know what is. So the Bose Arts is an outside as well as an interior design and style, where the other ones we didn't really go inside the house. Of course, there are other defining elements of the style that are inside the house, but this one is such a all-encompassing package where you also can, to go inside, it also helps define the style in a more particular way. Then we have that. Okay, so some of our resources that we use today are, what style is it? A Guide to the American Architecture by John C. Popeliers and S. Allen Chambers Jr. We also have the American Architecture, a History, and then some of those different articles that we have, I have them all located in one of my class readers. But those are some of the writings that influenced our program today. And if you are interested in further reading, you can go ahead and look those up and see if your library has them, or if you would like to buy them and learn more about this. They're your resources. So I have a little bit of time to answer questions.
Can you speak to George Washington's Mount Vernon?
So George Washington's Mount Vernon. Let's see if we can get a picture of that really quick, and then I can point to it while I talk about some of its architectural significance.
Let's see.
I think they're actually working on restoring Mount Vernon. They originally thought it was painted white, but it was actually painted like a beige, kind of like when we saw.
I'll put you in front of it.
All right, I will appear momentarily. Here I am. All right, so here we have George Washington's Mount Vernon. This is a very interesting style of house. I'm also not sure how much of it has been added onto throughout the years. This is very interesting. It has a bit of a hipped roof, as we can see here. So that's more indication to the Georgian. We also have the pediment over the door. I believe this was built in the late 1700s, also pointing towards the Georgian. But the Georgian, let's see. It looks pretty symmetrical. It looks like symmetry was interesting, but wait, it's a little off center is this door here, which is interesting. So I think the door could have been wider, or I mean, if you were trying to be symmetrical, but they might have run out of money, because sometimes that happens. But it does look pretty symmetrical.
They're calling it Palladian design.
So Palladian. The Palladian design very much references and goes into Georgian and Colonial, but it's very traditional. This could be Palladian as well. Thank you so much for joining me. I had a lot of fun talking about this topic. It's one of my favorite topics. So thank you so much for tuning in and looking at old houses with me. Until next time, bye.